Hi, and thanks for joining me. Last year I did a review of 2018, looking at the things that went right and the things that went wrong, and that proved to be quite a popular video, much to my surprise, so thank you all for supporting that. So I thought I'd do the same this year. So I'm going to look back at 2019 and the things that I did on the boat, problems I had, that sort of thing. So last year started in January, as it does every year, but we did have some snow last year and there was ice on the marina, which was well, not unusual, but it's not often you get ice on the marina, but it did ice up. So January was pretty cold start to the year. And then in February it brightened up and it made one want to get on with various jobs. And the first job I decided to do was fixing the cleats. My boat has a very short sort of bow, and I find it very difficult to reach the cleat at the point of the bow. So I decided that I would add a couple of cleats on either side to make it easier when I moor up. And I chose to buy some brass cleats. The problem with those was that they were smaller than a standard size cleat, but nevertheless it's what I chose. I thought they would be easier to mount as I only had to drill one hole and then tighten them up. That all went reasonably well, but I was aware that the juxtaposition of steel and brass is not good and it can cause rusting. But at the time I didn't think I had anything suitable to use to make a gasket to keep the two apart, so I didn't do anything. I did have a little bit of criticism for that, and I will be honest and say that very quickly some very light rust did start to appear, and that was just brushed off. But then I felt, well, I must do something to make sure that I'm not going to have a problem with rust. So I used some black leather cloth. That was easy to cut and enabled me to make up two circular gaskets. And I fitted those, and that has worked extremely well. There's been no signs of rust since. So having got it wrong to start with, I mean, I knew there was going to be a problem, and I was going to revisit it, but I did revisit it sooner than I thought I might. So that's good. Those cleats have been very useful in use, very useful indeed. I'm very pleased with having them. It does make life a lot easier for me. In March I decided to do something about my shower. The shower tray is very small. The whole environment of having a shower was very tight. The shower curtain used to cling to my body. So I decided to put a new curtain rail up outside the existing curtain rail, as this would allow the curtain to hang a little bit further out and provide a little bit more space for me. And that proved to be very successful. I showed how I went about that task. I had to cut the curtain rail strips to length and so forth. Just see how that fits now. It goes in there and that goes there. Perfect. Cut the fittings that they were being attached to. I was very pleased with the outcome of that, as I now have much more space to move around in, and I've coped very well. So yes, that was very pleasing indeed. Ever since I'd bought the boat, I'd had problems. Well, I don't know if it was a problem or not really. I still haven't got fully to the bottom of it. But the water pump used to go off now and again. It would just go bzzz. It could be every 3 or 4 hours. It could go a whole day and not do it. But every now and again you'd hear bzzz. So every night before I went to bed, I used to turn the water pumps off. That would certainly stop it from happening during the night and waking me up. And I've always regarded this as fairly normal, particularly from when I hired the boat. I was actually told that the water pump might repressurize at night and it's a good idea to turn it off. So when I bought my boat, I carried on with that same sort of principle, that I would turn the pump off at night. But it gets a bit wearing, to be honest with you, switching it on, switching it off, and remembering to do it when you get into bed and that sort of thing. And I decided to investigate a little bit further, and I made some inquiries, and it was suggested to me that maybe the pressure pump, the little switch in fact, needed changing, the pressure switch. So I looked into that and I bought a new pressure switch. It was only a few pounds, and here you can see me sort of fitting it. Didn't take long to fit. The pump is actually in the kitchen cupboard underneath the flooring section. So I lifted that up, got access to the pump. It was fairly straightforward to change the switch. I had to disconnect it so I could get access, because the switch was the far end of the pump rather than the close end as you looked at it. And I thought also it would be a good opportunity to change the water filter. Now, I had been to a local chandler to get the bits that I needed, and when I showed them a picture of the water pump, I was told that the filter was upside down. Well, I had no idea, but I decided that I would put it in the other way. I decided to do some investigation, and I found an exploded view of a SureFlow water pump with the filter, and it clearly shows the filter the way that it was already set up. So I chose to leave it like that. So anyway, I was quite pleased. I don't think changing the pressure switch actually made any difference. So all I'd really achieved was changing the water filter. I'm not even sure that that was strictly necessary. I found though that the pump was still going bzz now and again. I've said before that there always seemed to be water in the bilge, and that had always worried me. Now, I had thought it was to do with water leaking out around the top of the hot water cylinder, or the calorifier as they like to call it on a boat. Water had been coming up around where the immersion heater was screwed in. But I looked more closely, and I just had a sense that something wasn't right. So I called in some heating engineers to take a look. They gave me the joyous news that the hot water cylinder was actually cracked, and that was the problem. It was decided, therefore, to replace the cylinder, but not directly like for like. It would be a new cylinder with slightly greater capacity. It would be slimmer and upright. It was also decided that this cylinder would go into the back of my wardrobe in the bedroom area. Fortunately, there is space there to tuck away a cylinder, and that's what was done. I didn't film the actual work being done on the cylinder, but I did take some still shots to give an idea of what was going on. They'd taken the door off its hinges that led into the boat to give them more space to move around, and they worked very hard and they achieved the job in the day, and I was very pleased about that. In the process of doing the job, they removed the two pipes, the two hot water pipes that were running underneath the engine, and that was quite interesting. If you look at these, you can see that they're not in very good condition. So how much longer they would have lasted, it's very difficult to say. So I caught those just in time, really. So now I've got a brand new hot water system. Wonderful. When you do repairs on a boat, I think sometimes you begrudge spending out the money, particularly if it's a straight replacement. Something's gone wrong, you fix it, costs you an arm and a leg, and you sort of think, oh, what a nuisance. In this case, I didn't feel like that, because I was getting betterment. I was getting a better hot water cylinder, which was no longer going to be in the engine bay, so that was an improvement. It actually, in the back of the cupboard, warms the cupboard and my clothes that are hanging there, so that's quite an advantage as well. So now I have a brand new hot water supply. Surely all my problems with the bzz on the pump will go away. But no, they didn't. On a narrowboat, with the system that I had, when you turned a tap on, the pump would run. So every time a tap was turned on, the pump would run automatically. That puts the pump under a lot of wear. And a lot of boats have an accumulator fitted. And what the accumulator does, it contains water and it's pressurized, so that when you switch the tap on, you use the water that's in the pressurized cylinder, and that comes out and the pump doesn't need to cut in, which is quite a good way of doing it because your pump isn't being run so much, so it should last longer. So after a couple of months it was decided that I'd have accumulators fitted. I believe in some boats they just have one accumulator, but I actually had two fitted. This was what was recommended. So I've got one accumulator on the cold supply and one on the hot supply. So now when I switch the water on, the water comes out without the pump running. The pump will cut in only when it's needed. So I have got a far improved hot water system than I had originally. The day after I had the new hot water cylinder fitted, I had an engine service. I thought it would be a good idea to get an engineer in to start with and see how they do it and pick up some tips for when I do it myself. It's fairly straightforward when you talk to people. It's a question of replacing the oil filter. There are two filters on the fuel line. There's an air filter. And changing the oil, you pump the oil out because it's a marinized engine. You can't drain it from the bottom like you can with a car, so there's a special little pump on the side of the engine for pumping the oil out, and the oil in the gearbox was siphoned out. And I found that very useful to have someone show me how to go about it. I thought that would be a good idea for the first time, so I was very pleased with that. The engineer also tested to see whether there was any water in the diesel tank, and there wasn't. Sometimes water does get into diesel tanks. It could be via condensation or by other means, and it is said if you get water in your diesel you can get diesel bug, which then affects the running of the engine. But fortunately I didn't have any of that. He also checked the quality of the antifreeze in the cooling system. So that was very useful. I was pleased to have that done. I should say at the same time he also did some prep work for moving the batteries. I don't think I've mentioned the batteries yet. When I first bought the boat, the surveyor advised me that the batteries in the cabin shouldn't really be there. So when I bought the boat, there were two leisure batteries in the engine bay and two leisure batteries in the cabin beneath the dinette seat. That was a nuisance in a way, in that it was taking up space, which is quite valuable on a narrowboat when space is already very tight. There had always been at least one battery in the cabin because it is referred to on the specification for the boat. So anyway, I come along and I find there are two batteries there. They're fairly new batteries, and the plan was to move them into the engine bay. So the engineer, at the same time as doing the service, he welded in some angle iron into the engine bay, ready to support the batteries when they were eventually moved. That didn't happen straight away. That occurred later in the year. I have done various small jobs on the boat, which I don't think I've mentioned before. One was to provide some shelving in the kitchen. I had a friend who was having her kitchen changed, all the worktops and so forth, and she happened to have a table which was made out of a worktop, and the finish of that sort of matched the finish of my worktops. So I arranged for that table to be cut so that I could make some shelves for the boat, and that worked very well, I have to say. So where I had a small shelving unit, I now have a wider shelf above it, and I've found that very handy. And I also built a little bottle shelf for my soft drinks and things of that nature. I did need to use my jigsaw to cut one length of the shelving, and I was quite pleased with the job I did there. Got a nice straight edge. Don't always achieve that, but on this occasion I did. At the same time, I also made a short piece of worktop to go to the left side of the cooker. Having done that, I've never actually used it, but in case more space is needed, then it is there. It is a little bit heavy, so it's not the best solution, and I think it is something I would revisit when it's really necessary to do so. As I'm by myself on the boat most of the time, it hasn't been necessary to provide extra worktop space. I do cope with the way I do things. What I tend to do is I pull out the drawer, the cutlery drawer. I've only got one drawer. I pull the cutlery drawer out, and I use a flooring sample which I rest across the top, and that provides me with a little bit of extra workspace when I'm serving my own food. So that works very well. The boat has a very small galley, and I've taken some of the worktop space up by my microwave and my fridge. I bought a little tabletop fridge which runs from mains power. I did that because I found the 12-volt fridge was a little bit too small, and I needed a little bit more space for my purchases and things like that. So the tabletop fridge with a microwave sat on it does take up quite a lot of space, which leaves me with very little space. In May, I started my boat painting series. I've published 7 videos so far of painting the boat. I'm not going to dwell on that now, but I kept nipping down to the slipway to do work on the boat. I've never painted a boat before, so it was quite a daunting task, and I didn't really finish it either. My aim at the time was to improve the appearance of the boat before I went on my cruise to the Ashby Canal. The paintwork wasn't in a very good state. It was badly scratched. The roof was very light, although it was the blue colour of the boat. In places it was very light. It all needed looking at and dealing with. So my trips to the slipway when I repainted the boat were really to smarten it up and to make it look better. So I did the rubbing down, the painting. Most of the painting was done with roller. I still need to revisit that, so I will be doing some more this year. When I rub it down and paint it again, I will be laying it off with a brush. By doing that, you get a far better finish. But I was pleased with what I achieved. I think the boat looked very smart. The paintwork has got scratched and knocked from cruising, which is only to be expected. It still looks very smart when it rains, as boats often do, or cars and everything, when it rains and you get a nice finish. A lot of people do touch up their boats every year to try and keep them looking as smart as possible without having to do a full repaint. The next problem I had was with the shower again. The shower base is very small. This was the reason I'd moved out the shower curtain rail to allow the curtain to hang out more than it had been doing. But I had an incident. I actually trod on the outlet and I broke the shower tray around the outlet. That was a heck of a nuisance. I did a repair with some super glue, and I bought some special mastic which I got from a plumber's merchants. They said this was the biz, you can use it underwater, it doesn't matter if you apply it when it's wet and so forth. So I did a repair, and I was quite pleased with that. You can see here that the repair looks very clean, and it worked. It did work. After a while it did discolour, which was annoying, but obviously you can't really avoid that. But I later on trod on it again and made it worse. So I did another repair. That also held for a while, but eventually, I think the third time I did it, the time was up. I had to take some action to do something about the shower tray. In fact, I think I actually broke the shower tray without first realising it. On a narrowboat you have a galper pump, Because the shower tray is beneath the water level, the galper pump pumps the water out, so you have that running whilst you're showering. Water from the sink and basin drain by gravity straight out into the canal or marina, wherever you are, but they drain straight out of the boat. But you use the galper pump in the shower. And I don't think that I'd picked up that some of the water was going through the galper pump and some was going into the bottom of the boat. It took me a while for me to realise that, but eventually I did, and that was what led me to doing the first repair. I realised that I would need now to change the shower tray. So I did quite a bit of research online, Google, eBay, all these sort of things that one looks at, Amazon. And I couldn't find a shower tray of the same size as mine. In fact, what I haven't mentioned is that the shower tray had been renewed at the time I bought the boat. I bought the boat from Wilton Marina, and they'd done quite a lot of work on the boat at the time. And I had spotted that the shower tray had a vertical crack in the corner, and they very kindly replaced the shower tray for me. And I do recall the plumber saying that the shower tray he had sourced was too large and he had to cut around it in order to make it fit. So I did some research, and via eBay I managed to find a firm that actually manufactures the shower bases. And I contacted them and I asked them whether they would be able to cut it to size. It was the rim that needed cutting. The actual basin of the shower tray was fine, but the rim around it would need cutting back, and 3mm acrylic was not going to be easy for me to cut. And they very kindly said they would do that for me. So the next thing was working out the size that the shower base needed to be cut to. I ummed and ahed about that for a long while, measuring and remeasuring. I wanted it to tuck under the tiles, which the previous shower tray hadn't. I eventually came up with some measurements which would make it square. I had thought that one side was going to be slightly longer than the other, but I came up with some square measurements and I ordered it, and it was delivered. And when I fitted it, I found it was absolutely perfect. I was so pleased that I had taken some time and thought in working out those dimensions, because it worked an absolute treat. I did document changing the shower tray and all the associated works to the tiling and so forth. It was the longest video I've ever produced. It was 45 minutes. And some of you actually watched it right through, so thank you for doing that. It's always appreciated when these videos do get looked at right to the very end. And I think it might have given you 1 or 2 tips on how to go about things, but I'm just about showing what I'm doing on the boat rather than trying to teach others. I'm just working on my boat, trying to show you what I'm doing, and hopefully getting a satisfactory outcome. Although I'm not intending to talk about cruising, because this is not a cruising review, in July last year I visited the Market Harborough arm, and I stayed with my niece who has a private mooring there, and her mooring was rather choked up with vegetation, weeds and so forth. And when I left her I did have problems which I thought related to the weed hatch. And I gave some reverse thrust, as one often does. That often clears a bit of weed around the propeller, and all seemed to be well. And I was coming back up through Foxton Locks. I moored up the night before and all seemed to be well. I came through the locks, and as soon as I popped out of the top lock, the tiller arm was vibrating so madly. It was unbelievable, the vibration that was coming through it. I knew I had a problem and would have to stop and check it out. My bouncer's back with the tiller handle. I think I'm going to have to stop now and look at that. I should really have perhaps done so yesterday. And whilst I've been into the weed hatch before, this was the very first time that I'd actually had to clear anything from it. So that was a bit of a first. but there wasn't that much weed around it, and I did manage to clear it okay, and I carried on without any further problem. I am going to do another video looking at when I purchased my boat, how I went about that, the research that I did, the survey, things I like about the boat, things I don't like about the boat. But for now, I'll just say that one of the advantages of my boat, which is a disadvantage in another way, but one of the advantages is that the canopy is very low. My deck at the back is probably a foot lower. That's about 30 centimetres lower than it is on a traditional boat. And because of that, my canopy is lower, about a foot lower than other canopies, and that does allow me to get under the bridges. The problem is that if it's raining, you can't see through the windscreen. It gets very wet and you just can't see anything. And when I visited the Crick Boat Show last year, I noticed that Kinver Canopies, who made the canopy on the back of my boat, had a little demonstration model, and that had an opening window in the front of it. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. I wonder if I can get a window retrofitted. And I spoke to them and they said, yep, that's no problem at all. All you need to do, make an appointment with us to bring up your canopy and we'll get that sorted out for you. So that's what I did. I took the canopy off. I also took off the wraparound part around the stern because I wanted some work done on that. And I took it up to Kinver Canopies, and very quickly, an hour and a half or 2 hours or so, they had it all done. And I was absolutely delighted. They'd fitted in the window. You can roll it up and snap it into position so it doesn't fall down. And I was so impressed with the work they've done, and I can't recommend them highly enough. They also fitted some poppers onto the flaps over the cleats at the back of the boat. I've always found it a little bit of a nuisance that there was Velcro fitted around these flaps, and the Velcro used to catch on the back of whatever I was wearing. You know, if I had a fleece on or something and I was trying to hold the flap back, then the Velcro would catch. The reason for that was that the teeth were on the flap rather than on the lower part. And I think Kinver later decided that the teeth should be on the lower part and the receiving end of the teeth should be on the flap so it wouldn't catch on people. But anyway, they fitted these poppers and I'm very pleased with those. They're very useful when I'm mooring up. So another good job done. Something else that I've done to improve comfort on the boat is to change the saloon area around. In the saloon, I used to have one of these cube boxes with my fuel in, if you like, my wood and various bits and pieces for the stove. I also had a little table with the tabletop fridge on the top of it and a wicker basket with some stuff stored. It wasn't very cozy. There was the wood laminate finish, there's no carpet. I do rather prefer to have a carpet down. And I've been thinking about getting some form of settee to smarten up the boat and to enable me to have a guest on board and they can sit down because there was only really this seat that I'm sitting in. This seat was on the boat when I bought it. And it's proved very useful. It's very comfy. I love it as a seat. It's got a footrest as well. But there wasn't anything else for anyone else. So I had been using a sort of camping chair if anyone else was on the boat. Unfortunately, a neighbour was getting rid of a futon, you know, a settee that made out into a double bed. And he didn't want it. And I said, well, can I have it? So he very kindly let me have it. And I adapted that. I removed one of the sections. The whole thing was in like 3 sections. I removed one of the sections and I made up a little settee, put a brightly coloured throw on it, and it changed the whole feel of this part of the boat. And I was very pleased with that. If you look at this before picture, you can see there's no sort of warmth or anything in this part of the boat. But afterwards, it's far better. I put a rug down as well, made it much cosier, and that's worked really well. In September last year, the battery move was finalised. The engineer came on, he disconnected the 2 batteries that were under the chair to the Pullman dinette, and he relocated those into the engine bay, so I was very pleased with that. The problem, I think, with having the batteries in the cabin was the distance the wires had to travel, and it's just not regarded as very efficient. There's probably a little bit of loss of ampage or whatever. I'm not very good with electrics, I have to say, so there's no point in asking me any questions or telling me anything because I won't understand. But what I do understand is it's better to have all the batteries together. So the 4 leisure batteries are now also together. There was another little issue as well that was sorted out. It's difficult to explain, but there was always a little buzzing noise in the engine bay, and this was something to do with the wiring again, and that was overcome by fitting a relay, and that noise has gone away. It was reckoned that that was costing me about half an amp in power, so that's been done away with, so it's quite silent now in the engine bay. I had often wondered what that was, this little noise in the background, but that's been resolved. If I could explain it better I would, but I can't. So that's it, I'm afraid, but I'm pleased that that has been done. In September I cleaned out the stove and the flue pipe. I made a separate video on that, and I've put the link below so you can take a look if you're interested. I had quite a surprise actually when I was doing that, because when I was taking out the bits from inside the stove, a part fell down that I wasn't expecting. There was this sort of half-round cowl, and one of the fixing points had broken off, and because of that it fell down. And I wasn't sure whether this part should be there or not, but the research that I subsequently did proved that it shouldn't be there on a narrowboat, and the reason it shouldn't be there is that the flue height is much lower. Going from memory, I think the recommended flue height was 4.6 meters, and obviously on a narrowboat it's much less than that. So this half round cowl, which was at the bottom of the flue pipe, should never have been fitted, and I've taken it out, I've used the fire, and it's been great. So I've not had any problems at all since I removed that. So again, another good job done, one that I didn't actually know that needed doing, but at least when I come to clean the stove and the flue pipe next year, in fact I'll do it more regular now that I've got my own brush to do the job. I'll be doing it more regular than once a year, just to make sure that's kept clean and tidy. So we'll get round to that probably when the weather improves. I'll just clean it, because obviously in the summer the stove is very unlikely to be used at all. Something else that I've done that I've not mentioned before is that I've changed the roller blinds in the kitchen, or the galley area I should say, and the shower room. The blind in the kitchen was plain blue, very unimaginative, and in the shower room it was a sort of creamy white colour. Both had a little bit of staining on them, so they had to go. I had the idea that I'd like something colourful in the kitchen, but what I bought was far from colourful, but I really do like it, funny enough. My son helped me choose it. He thought it was just what I wanted, so that worked out fairly well. The dimensions of the new blinds are slightly different to the older ones, so I had to make adjustments for that and move the fittings around and that sort of thing. Rather like this natty little blind in the shower room. Far brighter than what was there before, so that worked fairly well as well. And then in December I changed the programmer for the central heating. The original Webasto programmer allowed you to start the heating off. You could program 3 different times to start the heating off. Only use one at a time, obviously, but you couldn't switch the heating off. So having set it going, it couldn't turn off automatically, and I decided that wasn't the best idea. So I changed that over, I bought a programmer with a special adapter cable that would fit with the Webasto system, and that's worked really well. I can program for each day 4 different on and off times. Now, I've not used all of those, but I have used 3 times each day. Sometimes I have the heating on, sometimes I use the stove. I don't use the stove all the time because it can actually get too hot, whereas the central heating is more controllable. It can come on and go off. I have it coming on automatically, but if I don't want it on, I just turn it off. The programmer is a little bit limited for use on the boat. I think it would be far more programmable in a domestic environment, but it's suited me fairly well. It does what I want it to do. If I'm away from the boat and I want the heating to come on in my absence, I can do that now. I couldn't have done that before. So that's been quite an improvement as well. So if I am out for the day and I'm coming back and I haven't been using the stove, the heating can come on and it can warm the boat up ready for me. So all in all, 2019 was another good year. I got on with various things to do with the boat. Really glad I made a good start on the painting. I hope to do a bit more of that this year. I'm not going to do that in a rushed way like I did last year. I was sort of pushing myself to get that done as I wanted it, as I wanted the boat looking smart really for going away on my Ashby cruise. I've been so looking forward to coming to the Ashby. I feel as though I've achieved something. I'm particularly pleased with that turn in. I should, in summing up, say a big thank you to all of you that watch the channel. The channel has grown very quickly just recently, so big hello and welcome aboard to the new subscribers. I hope you'll stick with me. I do enjoy receiving all your comments. They give me a lot of support and encouragement. I'm always appreciative of that. I like your ideas for new vlogs. If you've got anything you particularly want me to cover, I'll do my best to do that if it's within my capabilities. Don't ask me anything too technical though. I'm not very technically minded. I just sort of get by. I have an understanding of things and I seem to manage. So once again, many thanks for watching this video in particular. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, a sort of catch up of the things that I did in the course of last year. In summing up, as I always say, take care, look after yourselves. Bye for now.